Hello everyone, welcome to my new YouTube channel, Sephora Comments, where I comment on things because I can no longer watch the world destroy itself and not say anything. So I am tossing myself into the ring and we will see what happens. And I'm kind of terrified, so give your girl a little encouragement in the comments and subscribe because I'm excited. I have a lot to say and I have a lot of ideas for future videos. So for this video, though, I want to talk about probably my favorite political science theory, Horseshoe Theory, and specifically how anti-Semitism interplays with this theory, with Horseshoe Theory. Anti-Semitism really not only illustrates Horseshoe Theory, but also plays into all of the principles of the theory. So let's get into it. What is Horseshoe Theory? So Horseshoe Theory, like I said, it's a political science theory that basically dictates that the far left and the far right are more similar to one another than either one of them is to the center. So, for example, a fascist government that's founded on very far right political principles has a lot in common with a communist government, which is founded on very far left political ideas. They have things in common like consolidated power, wealth, and resources, authoritarianism, and what's left out a lot of the time when talking about Horseshoe Theory and what the far left and the far right tend to have in common is that they hate Jews. Whenever you see extremism, political extremism, but really any kind of extremism, it always comes along with some version of anti-Semitism. And this has been demonstrated historically and is also illustrated now currently in the West and specifically in the United States. So again, it's not always political extremism. It can be other kinds of extremism as well. For example, religious or secular extremism. So when there was religious extremism, there was the Crusades, for example, which was a series of holy wars, and a lot of Jewish communities were destroyed along the way, and many Jews were killed. On the other hand, there were times where there was secular extremism, like the Roman and Greek empires, and during those times, there was a strong emphasis on the mens sana and corpora sana, the sound mind and a sound body, and it was during that time that there was the desecration of the Jewish Holy Temple and the Jewish exile. And back to the religious side, the Spanish Inquisition, during which Spanish Jews were forced to either convert, leave, or die. And many of them had to go underground. They were called Moranos and hide their Judaism because otherwise they would have been killed for not converting to Christianity. Of course, also in that same arena of religious extremism is just jihadism and the Intifada, which was directed, yes, also in part against the West, but definitely has tremendous anti-Semitic, Jew-hating underpinnings. And politically, extremism, of course, fascism, that is the probably most famous example of anti-Semitism, Hitler and the Nazi Party and the genocide against Jews, the Holocaust. But people seem to forget about communism and what Jewish life looked like under the communist regime, especially religious Jews, especially once Stalin usurped complete power, because arguably Lenin tried to fight against some of that anti-Semitism, but once it was under Stalin, it was really, really horrible for Jews. I don't know how much mainstream American public education focuses on that part of history, but in Jewish schools and in Jewish education, we learn a lot, and we learn a lot of stories about what Jews had to go through under communist rule, and many were even deported to Siberia, including my grandmother, because her father was a rabbi. They were deported to Siberia and they barely made it out alive. Thank God that they made it to the United States and were able to survive, but they literally almost didn't make it. And so, yeah, communism is another example of political extremism, technically on the far left, as opposed to fascism on the far right, that also demonstrated tremendous anti-Semitism. And these are examples that I've given historically are only some of the examples. There's many more, but historically, over and over again, it's been demonstrated that whenever there is any kind of extremism, it comes along with Jew hatred. What's unique and what's really been a tremendous blessing about living in the United States is that it's a really brilliant system, because what happens historically is that society tends to have like a pendulum effect in terms of, in many ways, like this is true in other ways besides politics. There's, you know, in literature as well, where you have them becoming very utilitarian, like Hard Times and Dickens, and then going very romantic. And there, you know, there's this pendulum effect throughout history where society goes very far in one direction and then it's like, whoa, well, let's not do that, and like goes really far in the other direction and goes too far and then kind of goes back and forth. But what's really interesting about the United States is that because we have this two-party, two-side system, it's almost like a self-correcting system where we have very far-right extremists, but we also have the far left, and so the pendulum kind of swings against itself. And that's what's been happening for many years now, except now that we bring in Horseshoe Theory, what's been happening more recently is that, and depending on who you ask, some people will say this has been happening for the past 50 years, some will say the past 8 to 10 years, and some people will say since October. But what's happened is that the left has gone so far left, especially in terms of anti-Semitism, that they've actually come around to being similar to the far right. And so instead of the pendulum swinging it back against itself, it's kind of stopped. You know, I don't know how to explain it. It's like it's kind of like stuck, because all of a sudden the far right and the far left have this thing in common where they both hate Jews. And that's why you're seeing very bizarre things like Nick Fuentes, who's a self-proclaimed, I believe, neo-Nazi, cozying up to AOC. And that was like just one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen on Twitter, was AOC being like, we have nothing in common, please leave me alone. We have irreconcilable differences. I hate everything that you stand for, etc. But she was wrong. They do have something in common, and what they have in common is that they both are anti-Semites. Of course, she'll never admit that she's an anti-Semite. The left will never admit that she's an anti-Semite, just an anti-Zionist, and that's a video for another time. So suddenly you're seeing this shift between what used to be right versus left. And I think there was a time where people were concerned that there would, God forbid, be a civil war, because the right and the left was becoming so contentious between one another, and also drifting further and further apart. But because of the way that it's kind of come together, and the right and the left suddenly have this like this thing in common of hating Jews, I think that the conflict is not between the right and the left at all, but it might be between extremists and moderates, because the majority of the country, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, are on the moderate end, not just as it pertains to anti-Semitism in Israel, but also with other issues as well. People who are left of center and people who are right of center have more in common with one another than Nick Fuentes and AOC, or Brianna Joy Gray and Candace Owens, who also became BFFs after Brianna Joy Gray was fired for rolling her eyes in an interview with a relative of one of the hostages and displaying tremendous anti-Semitism and lack of sensitivity. And all of a sudden, Candace Owens is like, let's chat. We both hate Jews. Like, what else do we need to have in common? I mean, that was weird to see too. So the point is that whether you're looking at it through a historical lens, or whether you're looking at it as it's playing itself out now in contemporary Western culture and in the United States, Horseshoe Theory, I believe it's real. I think it's tremendously obvious. You know who hates Horseshoe Theory? Are leftists. Like, if you do some research and you just Google like Horseshoe Theory, a bunch of leftist opinions will come up and say that's ridiculous, because they obviously don't want to admit that they have principles that are similar to the far right. But I think it's like tremendously obvious, especially when you look at the way that it interplays with Jew hatred and anti-Semitism. I think it's very clear that Horseshoe Theory is real, and time will tell like where things go. You know, there's always a chance that again, like I said, America self-corrects. There's always a chance that the far left and the far right kind of are overtaken by the moderates. I do still believe that in real life, outside of like Twitter and social media, and mainstream media, I do believe that most Americans are somewhere in the center. And so, there's still that chance that self-corrects, and that's what we hope and pray for. But that's Horseshoe Theory in a nutshell. Horseshoe Theory and anti-Semitism. I hope you learned something today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. I am new at this, so please be nice. I can handle a little bit of criticism if it's constructive, but I also want to know from you, like, what do you want to see in future videos? I do have a couple of ideas for videos coming up I'm excited to talk about, but I want to know what you want to hear from me. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, guys.